10:45 on a Friday night, and there's a line stretching down the block, and a man with a clipboard is deciding one person at a time who gets to spend money inside tonight and who doesn't. This is the only business in this entire series where the owner's biggest strategic asset is standing at the front door turning away paying customers on purpose, because the wrong crowd of paying customers is worse for the business than an empty room. Sit with that for a second, because nothing else in commercial real estate works this way. A landlord wants every unit filled. A hotel wants every room booked. A nightclub, on a good night, actively wants some people to leave. That's the first thing to understand about this business, and it's the thing that makes it different from everything else we've covered. The product isn't really alcohol, and it isn't really music. The product is the room's temperature. Not the literal temperature, the social one. Whether the room feels like the place to be tonight. And that feeling is manufactured, deliberately, hour by hour, by someone standing at a door making judgment calls. And it can evaporate faster than almost any other asset we've discussed. A hotel's reputation erodes over years. A nightclub's reputation can die in a single bad Saturday. So let's walk through an actual operating night, start to finish. Because this business genuinely does compress into a matter of hours in a way that no other asset in this series does. And understanding the clock is understanding the business. 6 p.m. The room is empty and every cost is already running. Before a single customer walks in, the meter has already started. The lease on a nightclub viable space, and not every space qualifies because you need specific things. Sufficient square footage, the right zoning classification, enough distance from schools and residences depending on local ordinances, existing or feasible liquor licensing, sound insulation robust enough that neighbors don't shut you down within the first year. That lease is running whether anyone shows up tonight or not. The sound system, the lighting rig, the bar setup, all of it represents capital that was spent once, up front, and depreciates whether it's used or not. Staff are already clocking in, security, bartenders doing setup, a sound engineer testing levels, and increasingly, depending on the night, a DJ or performer whose fee was negotiated weeks ago and is owed regardless of how many people show up to hear them play. This is worth pausing on because it's a detail people miss. In most of the small businesses we've covered in this series, the big money is spent once, up front, in construction or acquisition. In a nightclub, a meaningful chunk of the big money is spent every single week because the entertainment budget, the DJ or artist fee, isn't a one-time cost, it's a recurring, sometimes rapidly escalating operating expense. A well-known local DJ might cost a few hundred to a couple $1,000s a night. A nationally touring artist or a DJ with real festival circuit credibility can cost anywhere from 5 figures to, for the biggest names, 6 figures for a single appearance. And that fee is due whether 200 people show up or 1,200 do. 8 p.m. The doors open and the first real decision of the night gets made. This is the point where door policy stops being a marketing slogan and starts being an actual operating decision with real financial consequences attached. Cover charge, if there is one, is a small and often symbolic revenue line, nowhere near enough to matter on its own. What matters is who the cover charge, the dress code, and the door staff's judgment calls let through, because those people are about to become either the best marketing asset the club has or a reason the best spending customers never come back. Here's the mechanic that makes nightlife different from a restaurant or a bar. Capacity is fixed, absolutely fixed, by fire code, and every single body that walks through that door instead of another body is a real trade-off, not a hypothetical one. A club with a 500-person legal capacity that fills up with 500 people who buy one drink each has made a certain amount of money. The same club, filled with 400 people who buy an average of 4 drinks each because they're the kind of crowd that spends, has made meaningfully more money with fewer bodies and less strain on staff and security. And that difference is the entire art of door policy. It's also why the security team isn't just a legal or safety requirement, it's a revenue optimization tool, deciding in real time who gets to be part of tonight's temperature. 9:30 p.m. The bar becomes the actual business. If the door decides who's inside, the bar decides whether the night was profitable. Because in almost every nightclub, beverage sales are the dominant revenue stream, meaningfully larger than the cover charge and any bottle service combined for a typical night. And the economics here are genuinely favorable in a way that surprises people coming from other hospitality businesses. A well-run bar program can achieve gross margins in the range of 70 to 80% on pour-based drinks, because you're selling small, controlled portions of a relatively low-cost input, liquor, at a significant markup, in a room where the ambiance, not the ingredient cost, is what's actually being purchased. This is also where a second, higher-margin revenue stream lives: bottle service. Selling a bottle of vodka that might cost the club $30 or $40 wholesale for $3, $4, sometimes sometimes 10 times that price to a table that wants a reserved spot, a bucket of mixers, and the visible status of having bottle service in a room where everyone can see who has it. This is one of the highest margin transactions in the entire hospitality industry, and clubs increasingly design their entire floor plan and door strategy around maximizing how many of those tables they can sell in a night, because a handful of bottle service tables can out-earn the entire general admission floor combined. 10:45 p.m., peak hour, and this is where the math either works or it doesn't. Almost the entire night's revenue gets generated in a genuinely narrow window, typically somewhere between 10 p.m. and 1 or 2 a.m. depending on local last call laws. Unlike a restaurant that has a lunch rush and a dinner rush and can spread revenue across a longer operating day, or a hotel that's theoretically earning around the clock, a nightclub has one shot, one compressed window to generate essentially the entire week's profit for that location. And if that window underperforms, bad weather, a competing event across town, a DJ who didn't draw the crowd the booking fee assumed he would, there is no later shift to make it up. The night is simply a loss, and the fixed costs from 6 p.m. don't care that the room stayed half empty. This is the single sentence that explains why nightlife is one of the more volatile hospitality businesses to own. Your entire monthly profit might depend on 4 or 5 specific Friday and Saturday nights, and if 2 or 3 of those nights underperform in a given month, which happens regularly, for reasons entirely outside your control, the month can go from comfortably profitable to a real loss, even though nothing about your operation changed. Midnight, the part that isn't about money and can end the business anyway. Somewhere in the middle of the night, in almost every club that operates long enough, something happens that has nothing to do with revenue and everything to do with liability. An overserved patron, an altercation, a security incident, someone who needed medical attention. This isn't a hypothetical risk you insure against and forget. It's closer to a certainty over a long enough operating history, and how the club handles it, both in the moment and in the eyes of whoever holds the liquor license, determines whether the business survives long-term far more than any marketing decision. Liability is one of the most consequential and least glamorous parts of owning a nightclub. In most jurisdictions, dram shop laws create liability for an establishment that serves a visibly intoxicated patron who subsequently causes harm to themselves, to someone else, in a fight, in a car accident on the way home. This isn't a minor compliance footnote. It's a category of legal and financial exposure specific to alcohol-serving businesses, and it's part of why liquor liability insurance for a nightclub costs dramatically more than general liability insurance for almost any other kind of small business, and why bar staff need real, ongoing training in recognizing and cutting off overserved patrons, not just a one-time certificate framed on the office wall. And underneath all of that sits the liquor license itself, which in many major cities is not something you simply apply for and receive. It's something you acquire, sometimes on a secondary market, for a genuinely significant sum, because many municipalities cap the total number of licenses available in a given area, creating actual scarcity. In some markets, a full liquor license can cost tens of thousands of dollars to hundreds of thousands of dollars just to acquire before you've served a single drink. And losing that license through a serious violation, a pattern of complaints, or a failed compliance review doesn't just hurt the business. In most cases, it ends it immediately, because a nightclub without the ability to serve alcohol is, in almost every viable business model, not a nightclub anymore. 2 a.m. The room empties and the real accounting starts. Last call arrives. The lights come up, unglamorously, all at once, and the room that spent 4 hours being the most desirable place in the city becomes, within about 20 minutes, a room full of empty glasses and a cleanup crew. This is the hour where the actual math of the night gets tallied. Total bar revenue, minus the DJ or performer fee, minus security and staff wages for the night, minus the fixed weekly costs amortized across however many operating nights the venue runs, equals whether tonight was a genuinely good night or a night that merely broke even while looking, from the outside, exactly as busy and successful as a great one. This is a detail worth sitting with. A packed room and a profitable room are not always the same room. A club can look from a phone camera at the door exactly as busy on a night that lost money as on a night that made real profit, because the difference lives entirely in spend per person and the specific costs of that specific night's talent booking. Information nobody standing outside in that line has any way of seeing. Now, the part where we zoom out from one night to the whole business, because a business that only exists for 4 compressed hours a night has to survive 52 weeks of that same pattern. The single biggest structural risk in nightlife more than any other hospitality business we've covered, is relevance decay. A restaurant with good food stays good food for years, even decades if the kitchen stays consistent. A nightclub's core product is being the place to be right now. And right now is by definition temporary. Trends in music genres, the specific neighborhood that's currently considered the destination, the DJ or promoter relationships that pull a crowd, all of it has a shelf life. And clubs that don't actively manage that decay through consistent reinvestment in sound systems, visual production, and promoter relationships tend to see a slow, then sudden decline in the exact peak hour crowds the entire business model depends on. This is where promoters enter the picture, and they're a piece of the business model unique to nightlife. Independent operators who bring their own following, sometimes a mailing list, sometimes a social media presence, sometimes just a reputation for throwing a good party, into the venue on a specific night, typically in exchange for a cut of the door or bar revenue that night. A good promoter relationship can fill a Tuesday that would otherwise sit dead. A bad one, or a promoter who takes their following to a competing venue down the street, can turn a previously reliable night into an empty room overnight. And because so much of the crowd's loyalty is to the promoter rather than to the venue itself, this is a genuine structural vulnerability. You can own the room, the license, the sound system, and the bar, and still not fully own the thing that actually fills the room on any given night. A case study, because this business has one of the more instructive cautionary tales in modern hospitality. Studio 54. In the late 1970s, Studio 54 in New York became, for a period of roughly 3 years, arguably the most famous nightclub that has ever existed, a place so associated with its era's culture that it remains a reference point in nightlife discussions nearly 5 decades later. Its owners, Steve Rubell and Ian Schrager, built its reputation on the same door policy principle we opened with: aggressive, visible, sometimes cruel-seeming curation of exactly who got past the velvet rope, which created an intense sense of exclusivity that made getting in feel like a genuine achievement, which in turn made the club a cultural phenomenon covered by media far beyond anything its actual revenue would have generated on its own. And it collapsed extraordinarily fast, for reasons that have nothing to do with the club losing its cultural relevance, and everything to do with the parts of this business that don't show up in the glamorous photos. The owners were convicted of federal tax evasion, specifically for skimming cash revenue and failing to report it, a temptation that a cash-intensive door and bar-driven business creates in a way few other industries do, since so much of a nightclub's nightly revenue historically moved through cash transactions that were, in an earlier era, easier to underreport than they are today. Rubell and Schrager served prison time, and the original Studio 54 closed within about 3 years of its cultural peak. The lesson isn't about tax compliance narrowly, though that's part of it. The lesson is that Studio 54's downfall came from the unglamorous structural side of the business, the accounting, the compliance, the legal exposure, not from the club losing its cultural cachet, and that pattern repeats across the industry with striking consistency. The clubs that fail are rarely the ones that stopped being cool. They're overwhelmingly the ones that got the money, the licensing, or the liability side wrong while the room was still, by every visible measure, thriving. So, does owning a nightclub actually work as a business? In the version where it works, you've secured a liquor license and a location where the zoning and neighborhood relations are stable, not a constant fight. You've built real relationships with promoters and talent bookers rather than depending on any single one, so no individual relationship leaving can gut a whole night of the calendar. You treat security and liquor liability training as core operating infrastructure, not a compliance afterthought, because the legal exposure in this business is genuinely higher than in almost any other asset in this series, and one serious incident handled badly can end the business regardless of how good the Friday nights have been. You reinvest consistently in sound, lighting, and the specific cultural relevance that got you here in the first place, because standing still in this business is functionally the same as declining, and you keep honest, complete books, because the temptation toward cash handling shortcuts that sank Studio 54 hasn't gone away just because payment technology has changed. It's simply taken new forms. Run that way, a well-positioned nightclub in the right location can generate genuinely exceptional margins on a good night. Few small businesses can turn a bottle of vodka into the kind of markup a night out can generate, and few businesses have a beverage program with margins as favorable favorable as a well-run bar, but on a good night is doing a lot of work in that sentence, because this is also, structurally, one of the more fragile businesses in this entire series. A business whose entire monthly outcome rests on a small handful of specific nights, in a room whose core appeal has a shelf life, serving a product that creates real legal exposure every single time it's poured, in an industry where the temptation to cut corners on the boring, unglamorous compliance work has historically been the thing that ends careers that the culture itself never touched. In the version where it doesn't work, the DJ booking fees crept up faster than the door and bar revenue did, chasing a relevance that was already fading. The liquor license got put at risk by an incident that wasn't handled properly, or the compliance training got treated as a checkbox instead of real operating discipline. A key promoter took their following across town to a newer room, and a night that used to reliably fill the floor started slowly, then all at once sitting empty. And somewhere in there, the temptation to underreport a cash-heavy business's real revenue started looking like an easy fix for a cash flow problem that a more disciplined operator would have solved a different way. And that shortcut, more than any bad night on the floor, is what actually ends the business. That's the honest version of this business, not a room full of people having the best night of their week. A fixed number of hours, a fixed legal capacity, a product that expires in relevance the same way a hotel room expires at midnight, and a legal and financial exposure that has nothing to do with whether the party looks good from the outside. Because in nightlife, more than in any other business in the series, looking successful and being successful are two different rooms entirely, and only one of them shows up in the bank account. We've now covered a hotel room that resets at midnight, an apartment building that's really 12 human relationships wearing a mortgage, and a nightclub that only exists for 4 hours a night. Next time, we go somewhere that never resets at all. A business that runs every single hour, every single day, and never gets to close the doors even when it's losing money.